to today's psychology crash course, where today I'll be covering the concept of cognition as relates to the associated mental process through two primary aspects, memory and thinking. So memory, what is memory? Well, me from the past, if you were to ask a psychologist, memory is learning that has persisted over time and information that has been stored and has been retrieved. To put this in simpler terms, we define memory as any indication that learning has stuck with a person over time. However, it isn't quite this simple. In order to fully understand the concept of memory, we must first uncover the information processing model of memory. In the IPMM, there are three stages in which Richard Schifrin and Richard Atkinson propose that we form memories in many different ways. First and foremost, sensory memory is commonly referred to as the first stop for external events. Sensory memory contains all of the information processed by the senses for less than a second. This is depicted well through an experiment conducted by George Sperling. So now, we're going to take a test. In just a moment, a 3x3 grid of letters will appear. However, they'll only be up for a split second. Try to see if you can remember any of the letters. Now, you all just took the experiment by George Sperling, in which he demonstrated that the entire grid must be held in sensory memory for a split second, and all 9 letters were momentarily available for recall. If you were all able to recall at least one of the rows of the 3 letters, then congratulations, you are displaying a phenomenon known as iconic memory. Iconic memory is Sperling's conclusion from the experiment that we all have, for a few tenths of a second, a perfect photograph in our minds of any given scene. The things we hear, however, can be remembered for a substantially greater amount of time. Our memory for auditory stimuli, or basic sounds, can be remembered perfectly for a brief 3 to 4 seconds. This is called echoic memory. And something to be taken note of is that sensory memory contains all of the information processed by senses for less than a second. Be that as it may, not all information in sensory memory is encoded into short-term memory, contrary to popular belief. Rather, short-term memory holds everything you are currently thinking. If we do nothing with short-term memories, or rather, if we think nothing of them, they usually fade in 10 to 30 seconds. Short-term memories are those we currently work with and are aware of in our consciousness. It is common belief that your short-term memory's capacity is limited to 7 items. Not all information in sensory memory is encoded into short-term memory. However, chunking is an involuntary means of expanding this limit. Through organizing information into familiar, manageable chunks, we can more easily recall information. This method includes the most mnemonic devices, which are very frequently used. On the contrary, long-term memory is our permanent storage. It has an unlimited capacity for how much we can remember, and once information is there, it's usually there forever. Well, now obviously there are extreme examples of this, such as people remembering a ridiculous number of digits in pi. However, even for the average person, one's long-term memory is extraordinarily capable. So, now that we've covered the basic levels of memory, we must delve into the levels of processing and the information processing model, which takes after a computer, oddly enough. In order to explain this concept, let's go to the thought bubble. So, there are 3 primary parts to this model: encoding, storage, and retrieval. Encoding is actually how we get information into our brains. You can think of this as a keyboard onto the computer, as it can transfer practically anything into writing. Storage is how we hold on to the information that encoding provides. In this way, it is much like a hard drive, where computer storage lies. And then there's retrieval, which is how we get the information out of our brains when we need it the most. Much like a computer's file system, retrieval can access individual pieces of previously remembered information and use them. Alright, thanks Thought Bubble. Now, alongside actually remembering the information you receive in your life, forgetting things is just as common. Memory by itself can be pretty incredible. There are people who can remember even the most obscure things. However, it can also be pretty inaccurate and not very reliable, like when you forget the name of a person you met just 2 minutes ago. Psychologist Daniel Schechter has identified what he refers to as the 7 sins of memory. He came up with the concept that there are 3 categories of memory-related sin, such as, drumroll please, forgetting. Here, 3 sins are located. Absent-mindedness, the first sin, is when our minds wander and seem to be elsewhere. Transience is when time decays our memories, and over the course of time, they seem to disappear. The third forgetful sin is blocking, which is described best when you have something you'd like to say on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't seem to spit it out. The second category is distortion, where another 3 sins are located. Misattribution is when our memories cross one another, like when you can't remember if something actually happened or if you just dreamt it. Suggestibility is when our memories become susceptible to suggestion by others. And bias is when current feelings can impact and influence memories. Intrusion, which is the third and final category, also contains the 7th sin. Persistence is when certain memories, which are usually bad in nature, don't go away, regardless of how much you may want them to. As seen with memory, humans can be amazingly gifted, yet brilliantly stupid at the same time. We can all be rational, yet irrational. This is due in part to our thinking processes, also known as cognition. When describing cognition and thought as a whole, we use multiple means of thinking. We can use concepts, which allow us to categorize and think about objects, people, and ideas that we encounter throughout our lives. According to the Myers Psychology for the AP textbook, that can also be known as the cognitive rules we apply to stimuli from our environment. We can also use a prototype, which is what we think is the most typical example of a particular concept. And we can also use images, which are the mental pictures we create in our own heads of the world around us. This can involve any sense, however, not only sight. These means of thinking are especially valuable when solving problems, which is a process that, requires a lot of thinking. As there were with cognition, there are also many different methods to problem solving at any level. The most basic technique is trial and error, and although this may work eventually, depending on the problem in question, it may take quite a while to figure out. As a much more effective means for problem solving, algorithms are where you go through procedures step by step, and therefore are guaranteed to find the correct answer. Even though this is still accurate, algorithms may still take up a lot of time, and there are more effective ways to solve problems further. Heuristics are less commonly known than the typical trial and error in algorithms. Essentially, this form of problem solving is where you just use your head. In fact, although it seems like the most obvious and direct approach that may not yield the best outcome when solving problems, heuristics usually yield correct answers quicker. The only problem with heuristics lies within us being human. We are prone to error, and the slightest trick may fool you over and over and over again. Just as we are prone to error and mistakes, humanity is also prone to making decisions based upon our intuition alone, or just our gut feelings. This is done through using and applying heuristics that we have gathered over the course of a lifetime. But just as in problem solving, heuristics can work out well when making a decision, yet they can also get the wrong answer. There are 2 heuristic approaches to making decisions: representativeness and availability. Representativeness heuristic is the probability of how well something fits a prototype. With this being said, however, we can sometimes be thrown off by preconceived prototypes. Availability heuristic outlines that we make our evaluations based partly on the ease with which we get the information on which we can make them. With that being said, if we can have easy access to information on something, we're obviously more likely to lean through this easy way. If information is hard to gather, we tend not to lean that way. Long story short, human nature is to be lazy, and we make lazy judgments. Anyway, if you have been watching this video, which hopefully you have, then congratulations! You just took the easy availability heuristic approach to learning about cognition and memory. This has been Psychology Crash Course. See you next time.